We have made it to part 4, the finale of Balabatish Questions. In part 1, we spoke about identity, how Torah is for everyone, even those who are working. In part 2, we spoke about self-talk, and we saw the different approaches that are found in introductions to Sfarim. We then spoke about jealousy, its dangers, and also the potential benefits. We left off last time by talking about the importance of focusing on yourself and not worrying too much about what others are doing. And that leads to the final Balabatish question. How should a person celebrate? Should he keep his successes to himself? We discuss some fascinating stories from Gedol Yisrael and Lahavdil, elite athletes. And to close off the series, we try to concretize some of the main takeaways from this series. We summarize some of the main ideas and also leave off with some practical action items. Thank you so much to the Ian Institute for sponsoring this series. I want to wish all of the Shtark Tank listeners a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and thank you all for being part of this conversation. My name is Yaakov Wolff, and this is Shtark Tank. A person could listen to this and maybe come to a conclusion that they should really, going back to like the humble bragging, they really shouldn't celebrate their successes in Torah so much. And I think I want to end with this topic, which I think that's a very bad conclusion to take from this conversation. Rabbi Sachs has a beautiful essay, I believe it's in at least one place where he talks about it is in Parshas Pekudei in his book Lessons on Leadership, where he's speaking to a school principal who was frustrated with certain things about how things were going in her school. And he basically told her, like, start celebrating. Start taking what you've accomplished and celebrate it. I believe Rav David Hofstetter, when he was starting Dirshu, he asked Rav, the Shevet HaLevi, he asked him about the siyumim that Dirshu was going to start making. As we know, Dirshu has these very big siyumim in stadiums with lighting and music. And by the way, if anyone's listening to this and knows Rav David Hofstetter, I would love to have him on Shtark Tank. So I would love to have that if anyone can help out. But he asked the Shevet HaLevi, like, so should the siyum be like a big deal or just like something like humble or whatever? And the Shevet HaLevi gave him 3 Hebrew words. He said, Hachi Gadol Sheyesh, as big as possible. So, you know, when a person's talking about their internal motivation, it's best to put their head down. When a person has accomplished something in Torah, you shouldn't be thinking, well, if I celebrate, it's going to cause jealousy. If I celebrate, it's going to cause discord in other people's. Like, no. If you've accomplished something in Torah, like, that's a cause of celebration. And I don't think anyone should make any mistake about that when listening to this conversation.
I agree completely. And it is a fine line, right? Because, you know, you don't, we talked about the difficulty in balancing, you know, the other side of the spectrum of being too humble and being too self-deprecating. But you also have to question this side of the spectrum, which is how I don't want to be bragging, I don't want to be arrogant. And it reminds me of a Gemara, I think, in Sota, that the Gemara says that a Talmid Chacham should be like Har Sinai. And if I'm not mistaken, the Maharsha, there are comments that I'm sorry, not the Maharsha. If I'm not mistaken, it's the Yavitz, Rav Yaakov Emden comments on that Gemara that the comparison of a Talmid Chacham, of a person, of a Ben Torah to Har Sinai, is that theoretically HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have given the Torah in a valley. Why do you have to give it on a mountain at all? You know, so it's a mountain, it's not too big of a mountain. And Rav Yaakov Emden writes that a Talmid Chacham, on the one hand, you don't need to be the biggest mountain. You don't need to look at yourself as the biggest, the greatest, that relative to the others. But you still need to look at yourself as a mountain. You still need to be something. You still need to be up, you know, high off the ground. So there is a certain balance there of not comparing yourself, but still valuing your own contribution. And I just want to mention two quick, I call it sources, two quick, references to this point of kind of showing off in a productive way your accomplishments. One of them is going back to Rav Chaim Kanievsky's Zichron Levrach. We mentioned him in a previous conversation about how he was proud of himself when he wrote his Sefer. What's interesting is if you look at some of his tshuvas that he wrote to people towards the end of his life, they also echo the same thing about just being proud of yourself intrinsically and also projecting that pride to other people in order to inspire them. So there's one particular tshuva that a question that he got from a student, a very shy Israeli yeshiva student who was finishing Shas. And his friends, this boy's friends, were encouraging him to make a siyum and to make a big deal about it. And the boy was like, no, I just don't want to be the center of attention. It's not this. I'm too tzanua. I'm too self-conscious. And they wanted to do something small in the apartment or whatever. And the boys wanted to do a big thing in the dining room with the whole yeshiva. And they debated. They said, we're going to go to Rav Chaim Kanievsky to ask. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky, also similar to what you said about the question from Rav David Hafstadter, he said the same thing. He says you should do it in the yeshiva, you should do it during lunch or whenever it is, at a time when the most people will see it, and the most people, because you are going to inspire other people to want to learn more and do more, to make their own siyum. And so you have to inspire. And maybe that's kind of the guide stick is, am I doing this because I just want people to think that I'm a genius and I'm amazing? Or am I doing it in a way that shows people the possibility of expanding their horizons? And it is a nuanced thing, and it's hard to say specifically exactly what constitutes what. But we know it when it's in this category or that category. And that's really the Ruach HaDevarim. And one last thing, which I knew this before it was famous. I came across this, but I was very happy to see that I think Rabbi Yisachar Frand Shlita, he mentioned this in one of his speeches surrounding the Siyum HaShas, the last Daf Yomi Siyum HaShas. He mentioned a particular grave, a particular tombstone in Har Menuchos in Yerushalayim. I've been there. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's a real thing. It is the grave of an old Yerushalmi Jew by the name of Rav Eliezer Yosef Letterberg. This was a person. He himself was a balbas. He was not a Rosh Yeshiva. He gave some shiurim in the neighborhood in Yerushalayim, but he was he had a business. I think he had a store right outside Shar Yafo at the time, selling like housewares or whatever. And he loved to learn. And he would sit in the store and help his wife and his family manage the store. And people would come in, and he was a known Talmid Chacham. People would come in and speak to him and learning. But he would manage the store because he didn't want to be supported by other people. And to make a long story short, he was diagnosed with an eye condition. He saw that it was hard for him to see, to read words, and the doctor diagnosed him with a condition that was going to cause him to go blind in a short time if he didn't have some serious operation. Now, in those days, obviously, even any operation was a risk. We don't have the medical capabilities that we have today. And so the doctor said, like, on the one hand, if you don't have the operation, it's a 100% chance you're going to go blind. If you get the operation, there's a 60% chance that you're still going to go blind because the operation is a risky one. And so Rabbi Letterberg decided, he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to delay the operation as much as I reasonably can with the doctor's orders. And I'm going to spend the next X number of weeks or months and learn as many Masechtas as I can by heart, so that if or when, God forbid, I go blind, I'm still going to be able to learn at a high level and speak and learning at a high level. And as the story goes, and this is verified by his children, and he learned Maseches Rosh Hashanah and Maseches Beitzah, what ended up being thousands of times. And he was able to learn it by heart. In the end, unfortunately, the operation, I believe, was not a success. He did end up going blind, but he spent the rest of his life learning happily and having a fulfilling life because he was able to do this. And on his tombstone is written the following. This is the grave of HaChassid Reb Eliezer Yosef B'Reb Yitzchak Letterberg. Hirbitz Torah Barabim, he taught Torah to a lot of people. Lamad v'chazar ba'al peh, he learned ba'al peh, learned by heart, and he learned the Masechtos of Yosher me'arba'as alafim pa'am Masechtos Beitzah Rosh Hashanah. He learned Maseches Beitzah and Maseches Rosh Hashanah more than 4,000 times. Ubitzava also kasav, and in continuing in the text on the gravestone, in his will he wrote the following: She'ulai kedai lacharos zos ala matzeva. Maybe it's worth writing this fact, this accomplishment on my matzeva, kedei she'ulai gam hakorei yekabel alav la'asos kacha. Maybe if I put this accomplishment, that I was able to do something so incredible, like learning 4,000 times on my matzeva, maybe the person who comes across my matzeva and reads it will take upon themselves to do the same thing. So I take from this incredible, and it's incredible because it's a real thing. You can go to Yerushalayim and see this with your own eyes. I think today they even put up a sign. He's become famous with the PR that he's generated. But I take 2 points away from this. Number one is that it's okay to be proud of yourself and to project your accomplishments in a healthy way. And the second thing is that in terms of the receiver, the person who's looking and being inspired, look at the way that he framed it. The way that he said it on his tombstone was, Kedei she'ulai gam hakorei yekabel alav la'asos kacha. the goal is not to think of me, if I'm the one who's accomplishing, it's not to think of me as so great and to be, go into despair because I'm so great and, you want to achieve this level that you can't control. The goal is to be inspired by somebody and then to take upon yourself to translate that back into your own life. What can I how can I be inspired? Can I learn it 4,000 times? Maybe I can learn 4,000 times, or maybe I'll learn it 1,000 times, or maybe I'll just be inspired to spend 10 minutes a day more. Whatever that looks like, it has to translate back into your own context. Otherwise, it's, as the Mishnah says, motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam. You're taking yourself out of your world and you're living in somebody else's world. Stop living in somebody else's world. Live in your own world. Take the inspiration. Make sure it's translating back into something which makes sense for you and inspires you to grow and to do more.
And I think just to tie your own world with the inspiration for others, I think it's an important point that maybe we don't talk about enough, which is that growing up in this American society, you think about like our sports heroes growing up. So it's all really about the individual ambition and accomplishment. Like, are you going to win the Super Bowl? Are you going to be the MVP? Whereas the Torah approach is a lot different. Like, we should really be thinking ourselves much more in the context and the fabric of our community and the people around us. And if we really internalize that understanding that we are a nation and that we are so interconnected and tied together in the healthiest of ways, so then the individual accomplishments and my own world and the healthy connection to other people's worlds will stem a lot more naturally. If you're thinking about yourself as like trying to be the Super Bowl MVP of the base medrash, so then you're really just trying to be better than everybody else. Whereas you're thinking of yourself as just like, how can I make the biggest contribution to Klal Yisrael? So then that really just frames everything completely different.
And one observation, if I may, from the sports world, because I am a sports junkie at heart, is it's interesting if you look at the conversations that happen in all of like the columnists, syndicates, or whatever, all the people that are talking about these things, like who is the best player of all time, for example. So a lot of people talk in the NBA about, is LeBron James the best player of all time? Is Michael Jordan the best player of all time? People love to debate these things. What's really interesting is that the only people that focus heavily on the comparison are the people that do nothing but talk. So the columnists, the journalists, the people that have to fill the airtime on their shows, they'll debate and they'll yell and scream and quote statistics. But one time I remember seeing, if you actually asked Michael Jordan himself, who is the best player of all time, you know what he'll say? He basically will say, I have no basis for comparison. Every era was different. Every person has their own accomplishments. LeBron James is a great player. I was a great player. In my time, I did what I could. In LeBron James' time, he does what he could. Lahavdil elef alfe havdalos. I think that's a healthy approach. If you want to be, so to speak, a Michael Jordan, and you want to be somebody who's really focused on developing and accomplishing and doing, then that's what you need to. You need to focus on that kind of mindset, that kind of perspective of just appreciating that every situation, every person has their unique contribution and development path. If you want to be just talking about other people all the time, that's not the job of Michael Jordan. That's not the job of LeBron James. They're not concerned with other people. They're concerned with developing themselves, taking inspiration, input from other people, and being the best that they can be, as cheesy as that sounds. That's really what they think. The people who just talk about comparing people, they end up just making a living comparing people together, and that's just what they focus on for their whole life. If you really want to be in the parsha of LeBron James, Lahavdil, Michael Jordan, or whatever you're doing, then you're not in the game of comparing yourself to others all the time.
And so important. You had a great story in our very first conversation in this series about Ilson, about people try to hack him about Derech Halim, but he said, well, let's learn. And I think another great story is with the Netziv, where people asked him about his greatness, and he said, well, while everyone else was talking about how to be great, I was just like learning. Or people talking about how to learn, I just learned. So I think that's an important distinction. And going, again, back to our first chapter about Talmud Torah is for everyone. So even LeBron James, Michael Jordan, high performers, they do some level of talking and speaking and discussing, but it's really only performance focused. Like, is this conversation, we're sitting here with mics at the end of the day, but is it in order to perform better, just go get back to the Spanish after this and be better? That's what's really going to separate the men from the boys, as they say, whether we're just hawking for the sake of hawking or having the conversations to really understand. I'm sure, Michael Jordan does love learning from other players who he might look up to as better than him in a certain aspect, only because it'll get back to better performance.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a story I once heard, if I'm not mistaken, from Rabbi J.J. Schachter, but I might be misquoting, but I believe it was him. He was talking about his Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, and Rav Soloveitchik famously studied for a few years in Berlin University, and Rav Soloveitchik had a very rigorous schedule of both learning his academic studies and also keeping up with his Torah learning, and he would correspond through writing with a lot of the Gedolim, the great rabbis of the generation in learning. And when they would come and visit Berlin, Rav Soloveitchik apparently would make time to go visit them and spend time speaking to them and learning and engaging with them in that way. And Rabbi Schachter reflected that on one occasion, there was a particular gadol, I don't know who it was, some big rabbi, well-known rabbi in Europe, who was speaking to the Rav. And after their conversation, he says to Rav Soloveitchik, tell me something. I don't get it. You spend all day in this university, and yet you're able to learn at such an incredibly high level. How do you do it? It doesn't make sense to me. And Rav Soloveitchik responded, similar to what you quoted from the Netziv. Rav Soloveitchik said, it's very simple. When you're learning, I'm also learning. When you're busy talking about the fact that I'm in university, I'm focusing on my studies. So it's like, what's your focus? What's your priority? Are you just going to focus about complaining, kvetching, comparing? Or are you just going to say, let me just do it. Let me just go ahead and try to accomplish the goal that I'm trying to accomplish.
So on that note, we will wish our listeners well. We'll have them turn off this podcast and get back to the Beis Medrash. But I do hope that these conversations will really help inspire people to go back and have the right approach and mindset as they're going about their lives, trying to be great Torah Jews wherever they are, whatever it is they're doing.
100%, and it goes without saying, all this is easier said than done. It's a process, it's a struggle. The Torah is called, as the Gemara says, the Torah is called a derech, and a derech is something which seemingly has no end, and that's okay. It's a process, and the point is just to be aware of it, to have these conversations, to keep them going, and to just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So thank you, Yaakov, for creating a space for having these conversations.
Thank you, Zevi. Okay, Zevi, we had some really cool conversations, and because they're a little bit free-flowing and a little bit broad, I wanted to just sit down with you and go through some of the main takeaways and some of the main action items that came out of our previous conversation. So going back to the very beginning, on a very basic level, Talmud Torah is for everyone. If you look in the Rambam, Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Aleph, everyone. And then this elite level of Keser Torah, also, Munach Lakol. It's there for everyone to take. Now, we pointed out that the Rambam seems to indicate that there's such a broad range of what classifies Torah, because different people can be in different situations and have different challenges, but there's really just this very, very complex and diverse canvas of what Torah is, and having that awareness can really help us understand that whatever it is we're doing can be lechatchila, and this can be a very, very crucial part of Torah as well. Great story from the Chafetz Chaim that we had in that context also. And then those different approaches as far as especially, the different identities that were talked about in yeshiva, the more intense Lamdan identity versus like the simple Balabas identity, and all of these conversations, what it really comes down to is this serving me? Is this helping me? Is this something that is useful in bringing me closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu and having better engagement in Talmud Torah? So that was sort of some of the main takeaways from our very first conversation. Then we spoke a little bit about self-talk and the negative self-talk that is somewhat prevalent in today's society. And we showed how in Torah sources, especially introductions to Sfarim, that is a conversation which exists and is taking place. And we had a great comparison between a father and son to Gaonei Olam, the Stipler, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky, how they both had different approaches to having the more positive self-talk, being proud and looking positively upon their accomplishments, versus the more critical and negative self-talk, which is there in the Hakdama to the Kilos Yaakov. Now, low self-esteem is just a challenge that we all have to be aware of and negotiate in today's day and age for various reasons that we discussed a little bit, but we need to call it the challenge and deal with it. If it's challenging to us, if it's damaging to us, so we have to really think about it deeply and think about strategies to combat it. And again, coming back to Torah, so also in Torah we have these different sources. Kinas So from Tarba Chachma seems to say that Torah is a positive source, that jealousy is a positive source of driving motivation in Torah, versus, Kina being a source of Motzinas Adam Min Ha'olam, it can really take you out of the world that you're supposed to be living in. And really the ideal, the gold standard that Rabbeinu Yonah mentioned in his Parashah Pirkei Avos, and we discussed it a little more at length, is that this is your life. What other people are doing really shouldn't matter, and the ideal is to focus on yourself and what you're able to accomplish and what you're able to do. And then in the end, we spoke about celebrating our accomplishments and being proud of them, and how that can be a really great way to inspire others and to inspire ourselves to continue to do great things in Torah and the importance of that. And finally, we got into a really cool conversation about the difference between being a player and being a spectator. all the conversation that we have, all the podcasts that we're hopefully producing and listening are really just having that player's mentality, that it's really just there to enrich us and to inspire us and help us perform as a Ben Torah, and not to think that we're just hackers, sitting here talking and analyzing other people's accomplishments in Torah, but really just conversations that will help motivate us to step on the field and play the game in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's a great summary, and I can say with pretty high degree of confidence that this is probably the only podcast in the history of the world that featured focus both on Rav Chaim Kanievsky and the Stifler and on Michael Jordan and LeBron James in the same conversation. So that is certainly a unique niche that we're able to fill. I would just, one more thought of summary before maybe sharing a couple of practical reflections is that, I think the overarching theme behind all the points you mentioned is just that, let's stop. I think we all need to stop thinking about these things so simplistically. This is a really this is a really three-dimensional, dynamic kind of conversation. And as I think I quoted from one of my rebbeim, is that a person needs different tools in their toolkit, different weapons in their arsenal, different dapim for different days and different situations. And some days are going to be the quick, dirty kind of learning or davening, and some days are going to be that really inspirational, in-depth. And life is just going to be a beautiful mix of all of those different things. And it's not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just a reality that times change, circumstances change, and we just have to embrace that and do the best we can. In terms of tachlis, practically. So what does that mean? I'm speaking from a little bit of experience because, quite frankly, I struggled and continue to struggle to an extent with a lot of these things. A person is always, it's hard not to look out the window. It's hard not to feel inadequate. It's hard not to compare yourself to others or to figure out how to, channel these things in a more productive way. Even if you have all the academics and all the maramakomos, at the end of the day, what do we do? How do we get better? And I don't know that I have a full answer, but just to share a couple of specific suggestions, it really boils down to looking at all of these things as like a muscle or as a habit. Because just like if we wanted to get stronger or we wanted to learn how to run a marathon, we would realize that, okay, we're not there yet, but we need to have a training regimen and you need to exercise the muscle. And you go to the gym one day, it doesn't mean you're going to be looking like a bodybuilder. You understand that there's a process and you have to kind of have repetitions to flex that muscle and to apply the tension that is needed in order to strengthen and to give you the muscle tone that you desire. And I think the same thing is with these things. Even though we're not talking about physical muscles, we're talking about kind of mental models and frameworks and the way that we think. I think that the same discipline applies. So, for example, if we're talking about comparing yourself to others, and you find that that's a challenge that you slip into, maybe one of the ways to flex that muscle is to lean into focusing on yourself. So, for example, very practically, advice that I got many years ago was to have something small that you're doing literally just for yourself. Have a seder that's not with a chavrusa, it's not flashy, you're not going to invite 100 people to see him. Something that only you know about. So like lahavdil, if you were one day going to have an art scroll biography written about you, like that story that nobody's supposed to know, but somehow people find out about it, do one of those things. Do something that's you're proud of, that's small, that only you know because you're just doing it for yourself. Flex that muscle of focusing on you and being proud of you. In terms of some of these other kind of challenges or perspectives that people might find challenging. So if there's people struggle with a sense of I'm not good enough and I'm not capable of self-deprecation. So on the one hand, you could say just talk positively. Okay, that's a good suggestion, but it's not always so easy.
Or get
help, right? I mean, that's obviously getting help is always a great idea, but maybe another element that could be considered is leaning into it and flexing the muscle of being more secure. So for example, if a person says, I'm not qualified to write that article, or I'm not good enough to give a chabura on chumash at my, if you could find a safe context for stepping one half step outside of that comfort zone and doing the things intentionally that you are, quote unquote, not good enough to do, that allows you to to kind of flex those muscles and to be less limited by those beliefs. So it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to write the Sefer or write the best article or give a knockout chabura for the next 10 years, but you should counterintuitively prove to yourself that these are limiting beliefs that don't have to be as limiting as they are now. Just take one half step in whatever in that comfort zone.
Yeah, I don't want to start going into any rabbit holes, but it's just such a great point. I recently applied for a certain position somewhere, and I had a conversation, an interview, whatever you might want to call it, and it was really just so hard for me to talk about some of my accomplishments, and I just have to practice that, get used to it, because we all have accomplishments, and we all at some point are going to need to talk about them in a healthy way. And so if you're not comfortable with it now, you got to practice it and get in the zone.
100%. And that's a second suggestion. A third suggestion I would say is simply to understand the effect of inputs in terms of the output. So, if a person is just in an environment where they're just getting negative inputs and they're just being told that you're not good enough, and it doesn't even mean that you're not in a healthy space, but like if you don't have a disproportionate balance of positive encouragement coming in, then you're going to struggle. So I would suggest find people who encourage you, find people who do give you that kind of positive vibe, either directly or indirectly. I think I mentioned in our first conversation that we had a few months ago that one of the beautiful connections that I've been able to develop is with Rav Hershel Schachter. And I go and show him things that I've written and things that I've done, and he encourages me and gives me a lot of encouragement to continue. And I really seek out the relationships of the people that I respect to be able to get that feedback. The last thing I would say is just to not think of the struggle as being something which is inherently bad. I think that the struggle is part of what is expected, part of the journey, and there's no such thing as a journey without road bumps and a road without potholes. And so to understand that, like, being able to lean into the difficult parts of being a Ben Torah, being a Balabas, and to continue, step by step, despite the anxiety, despite the tensions that we feel, I think that is it's not something that we need to apologize for. Lahefech, it's something that I think we should be proud of and lean into and celebrate that we're continuing to progress despite all of these things that we're thinking about that's on our plate.
Thank you, Zevi.
All right, Yaakov, keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Shtark Tank. Please make sure to leave a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us grow the show. Until next time, keep on steiging, Chevra.